Hey guys, and recently I've noticed a weird issue with third-party games on the Nintendo Switch 2. And no, I'm not referring to game keycards, even though that is a separate issue. I'm referring to the fact that Nintendo has been weirdly restrictive over dev kits and aren't giving out that many. Many developers who want to port their games or develop games for the Nintendo Switch 2 unfortunately aren't able to. Some developers aren't even able to create Switch 2 upgrades as well. Even the developers of Mousework, a game specifically designed for the Switch 2, are having trouble getting a dev kit, which is absolutely ridiculous because according to some developers, Nintendo is mainly giving out dev kits to developers who would take advantage of the Nintendo Switch 2. And I think that's kind of weird because I don't necessarily think that if a game doesn't necessarily take advantage of the Switch 2, it shouldn't be on the Switch 2, because there are a lot of games that could have greatly benefited from Switch 2 versions. Like recently, Shinobi Art of Vengeance had resolution issues on the Switch 1. That is going to be resolved, but I feel like a Switch 2 version likely wouldn't have run into those issues in the first place. And Switch 1 games in general, without the upgrades, also look kind of fuzzy when playing in handheld mode, because a lot of Switch 1 games are locked to 720p in handheld mode, and the Switch 2 still renders them in handheld mode. So I think a Switch 2 version or update at the very least would kind of resolve these issues for like a lot of developers and a lot of these games. And going back to the point of Nintendo apparently only allowing dev kits for games that take advantage of the Switch 2, where exactly do they draw that line? Because we're seeing games like the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, Mina the Hollower, and Silksong that don't necessarily take advantage of the Switch 2. Yes, I do know that the last two games that I mentioned run at 120 FPS, but I feel like a lot of other indie devs and smaller developers could have similar upgrades to their games, and I think that would be very beneficial for reasons that I will mention later in the video. But I definitely think it would be nice if more developers were able to get these dev kits so games could be upgraded. Another issue for the developers that were lucky enough to get dev kits is the fact that they got them too late, which is leading to some games being rushed. And yes, this is a bit of speculation, but I feel like that very likely was the case, because a lot of these games that could have easily been optimized to run on the Switch 2 are running into some performance issues. We've seen a game at launch, Hitman World of Assassination, that ran into some performance issues. Thankfully, it was ironed out, but that was pretty concerning to see. And we're also seeing games like Elden Ring, that's not out yet for Switch 2, but there were demos for it, that did look pretty concerning with how it ran and looked. So it kind of seemed like that game didn't get enough time to be optimized. And then there's also instances like Madden 26, which again could have been optimized, but just kind of runs a little poorly. And I feel like these performance issues aren't necessarily due to the console being too underpowered, because we have seen a lot of demanding games on the system, like Cyberpunk 2077, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which does look good from the footage that we've seen, even though it isn't out yet, and Star Wars Outlaws. And I do know for Star Wars Outlaws that did have some performance issues in the demos of the game, but seemingly, the final version of it runs fairly well. And the thing is, well, the Switch 2 isn't close to being a current-gen level powerhouse like the PS5, it still is a decently capable system. It kind of falls in between the PS4 Pro and Xbox Series S in terms of power, and games haven't really progressed that much since when that level of power was the cutting edge. So with some optimization, I feel like a lot of current modern games can work on the Nintendo Switch 2. There just hasn't been enough time or effort to get these games to work. So if Nintendo gave out these dev kits earlier, it would have allowed developers to have more time to optimize these ports for the Switch 2, rather than rushing to meet deadlines. And the thing is, with all of this, Nintendo's hesitance to fully allow third-party devs to develop for the Switch 2 is kind of contradictory. Nintendo has been advertising and pushing third-party games for the Switch 2 quite a lot. They had a huge presence in the April Direct, and even did a partner showcase on top of that. And I've seen a lot of advertisements for games like Cyberpunk and Street Fighter 6 on the Switch 2. They clearly want the Switch 2 to be a bigger console for third-party games than the Switch 1 was. That's why this situation has been really confusing. The only reason for why I could see them being so restrictive over dev kits was to prevent the console from leaking, which we now know in retrospect was completely useless because the Switch 2 leaked anyway and was literally one of Nintendo's worst kept secrets. But since the console's out now and they're still restricting dev kits, it could have also been to prevent data mines, which I don't really think is that useful either because it will probably end up being hacked at some point. And I think being this restrictive not only harms Nintendo, but more impactfully, also indie devs and smaller developers. I think a lot of games could have greatly benefited from the boost of the Switch 2 from a marketing perspective, especially since the Switch 1 is slowly becoming less relevant. So not having that Switch 2 option available could cause developers to miss out on a lot of potential sales. And yes, while the Switch 1 obviously has games that show up on the Switch 2 eShop, the Switch 2 games are featured more prominently and have a banner across each of those games. So it would really benefit the games that did run natively on the Switch 2. So that's just kind of my take on the whole dev kit situation for the Switch 2. I think there's just a lot of issues kind of coming out of this, and it's really unfortunate. It kind of goes back to that one video I made about Nintendo kind of being a little too scared of leaks, because Nintendo being restrictive in response to that is causing a lot of other bigger issues. But anyways, let me know what you think down in the comments, and anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and make sure to check out my Discord server and Blue Sky if you want to. Stay perky!